I retired from British Rail a long time ago in 1986 at the age of 63. I was made a driver in 1961 at Concept. There I drove steam engines for 2 years. Then I was transferred to Tyne Yard near Birtley as a diesel driver. I worked there from 1963 till 1967. Then I moved to one of the premier sheds in the whole country, Gateshead. During those driving days, first of all, I was the driver. Alright, many other grades on the railway superseded me, such as inspectors and foremen, but I did my job properly as a driver and worked without supervision. I took my job seriously and I got on very well with anybody connected with the railway, be they second men, porters, guards, signalmen, and of course the gaffers. In the following tale, I was to drive a train from Edinburgh to London. The Haymarket second man met me at Waverley Station, then took me back to the depot. He was responsible for seeing off or tying the loco onto the train. By then he had to deal with electric train heating to connect to. I had my bait at Haymarket shed and got the number of the engine from the foreman. He said the loco had been made ready by a Haymarket driver. On those terms it was the Gateshead driver's job to prepare the loco for its trip to London. Outside I met the preparing driver. "She's all yours, mate." It was a Deltic. Now this loco and the Class 37 do not have self-adjusting brakes, and on the Deltic, shall we say, these brake systems could be the failing point of this loco. I stepped into the cab and fully applied the straight air brake. Then I got down and examined the brake blocks. All the blocks were very thin. The majority of them didn't even touch the wheels with the brake fully on. It was a definite hazard working the Deltic light engine to the Waverley station. Once coupled to the train, however, the train's brake did the job. But when the engine got to King's Cross, the driver there would need to ferry the engine to his depot. He could drop in. Anyway, the preparing driver was there, and I asked him, would he work this loco? "I wouldn't, Geordie," and he apologised for his lapse in not preparing the loco properly. I sent for the foreman fitter. He knew of the Deltic's fault and was obviously hoping that the Gateshead driver, me, wouldn't notice. I drew his attention to the fact, and his reply was in strong words indeed. I had recognised the foreman fitter of old. I was up there one day working the Talisman to London. On that job I would have got relieved at Newcastle by a Gateshead lodging crew. It was a Friday afternoon. I hung around in the mess room with my Haymarket second man. The running foreman passed by and said to me, "You'll get a Deltic shortly, I'll let you know when it's been made ready." I got the Deltic at the last moment. Black Watch was its name. The foreman fitter stood at the shed doorway and watched me climb aboard. No one can really tell what an engine's like running light engine the short distance to the Waverley station. I had a good look through the repair book, but there was nothing of any importance. The second man tied on. I got the brake test and departed right on time at 1600. The train was full of people travelling for the weekend and I had 12 coaches on. I opened up past Portobello. The two engines made plenty of noise, but straight away I could tell the Deltic wasn't doing its stuff. But I was single-manned. No entry had been made in the repair book, and so I had no second man to send back into the engine room. I knew the Deltic had two field weakening stages, 40 mile per hour and 80 mile per hour. When the field divert for 80 mile per hour went in, a driver could feel the surge at his back. After that, the Deltic could catch pigeons. Going up Coxpan's Path, the speed was down to 30 mile an hour, so I whistled off when passing Tweedsmouth, then Almouth, and finally Morpeth signal cabins. Control got the message. They could see I was losing a lot of time. At Newcastle, the 47 was waiting with the crew on board. The second man from Gateshead was there to loose the Deltic off, and I took it to the shed. At the daily shed, the charge fitter met me. I told him what was wrong. "Don't worry, driver," he said. "This engine's going to get sent back straight to Haymarket shed light engine. It's their engine, and I think the foreman fitter's conned you. It's a power fault, and my electricians aren't going to strip that down." In the third tale, I also took a train from Edinburgh to London. Again, with the Haymarket second man, we took a Deltic from Haymarket into Waverley. I drove the Deltic up to the train. I got off with the second man and stood on the platform, making sure that he did his job properly. I had my master key in my pocket. This is how the procedure should be. After the second man had tied on, I would then swap ends, go to the driving cab, insert my master key, get the air brake, then wait for the guard's permission to establish train heat by pressing a button on the desk. The guard would then come to the driver before departure and tell him how many coaches he had on, the maximum speed, weight of the train, and tell the driver he can establish train heat. Finally, he arranged for the vital brake test before the train set off for London. I watched my second man. He had quite a job: 2 air pipes, 2 cumbersome sets of jumper cables, and the heavy coupling. He also had to open the 4 sets of brake cocks, and that's why I stood there, making sure he did it properly. 3 men walked past me and entered the driving cab of the Deltic. They saw me right enough, and I recognised one of them as the Scottish Chief Locomotive Inspector. The other one was wearing civilian clothes. The third was the driver. They ignored me as if I wasn't even there. I was well and truly knocked by their attitude. The second man completed his duties and left the train to return to Haymarket. I entered the driving cab of the Deltic. In the driver's seat sat the driver. He had inserted his own master key and established brake pressure. He'd also established train heat. I could see the light glowing on the desk. That was a fault. I hadn't seen the guard yet. Before I could speak, the Scottish Chief Inspector spoke. "It's all right, driver. The driver here will take the train to Newcastle. He has the road signed. You can ride on the cushions." I said to the driver, "You can get out of that seat right now, Bonnie lad. I'm the driver of this train." I then made my point to the Chief Inspector. Nobody had authority to establish the brake, and even more important, to put the electric train heating on. By now I could see he was annoyed. "I intend to drive this train properly, so you 3 can just stay here in the cab and stand back." The Chief Inspector blustered. He asked for my name, which I told him, and I told him similarly that I would fully report the matter at Newcastle. Now the other inspector stepped in. "Perhaps we should leave it, Jock. The driver means what he said. We could drop in, not him." So they all departed. I found out later that the Haymarket driver had lost a lot of time with the Deltic a day or 2 previously, and this was the inspectors, yes, 2 of them, checking up on him. I didn't report the matter, but they were wrong by what they had done, and I never heard anything more of it. The final story will also include a Deltic. However, prior to that, to set the scene, we'll go back to 1966, when I was in the spare link. At this point, I was driving freight trains. I like to give the guard a smooth ride, and if I let an experienced second man drive, I was quite firm with them. I'd had thrown 2 of them out of the driving seat already because of rough handling guards, and did not let them drive again. One day I was going from Tyne Yard to York Drink Houses one summer's afternoon, with a Class 40 pulling a semi-fitted freight train, a Class 7 load restricted to 35 mile an hour, and we had the equal of 50 on. Single manning had just been introduced for mainline trains. Doing 35 mile per hour, I was running on the down main line through Darlington. All the colour lights in front of me were green, a clear run. Then the one right in front of me went red. Nowhere in any BR rulebook or the regulations will you read that a driver must stop immediately. Not even today. It says he must stop as soon as possible, no more. Nevertheless, all the signals turned to red in front of me, so I made a fairly rapid stop indeed. Once stopped, I got down and walked back to Darlington North cabin where the signal had been put to danger. A young signalman met me at the top of the stairs. "What happened?" I said. "Just seeing if your brakes were working all right, driver." The other, older signalman intervened. "You've got a hot axle box on, driver. Pargate have just informed me." I asked, "Well, you could have slowed me down by giving me a single yellow, perhaps?" "Well, I suppose so," said the signalman. "Right," I said, "I'm going back to see if the guard is all right. You can see I've made an emergency stop and the train's loose coupled." The guard was shaken up. He hadn't been expecting to get a bump since I was driving, and he knew me. There were lessons to learn from this, particularly for the signalmen. Today's freight trains are nearly all fully braked and don't carry guards, and if they do, they ride with the driver or in the rear cab. Guards vans are a thing of the past. On Christmas Eve 1977, I signed on at 02:25. I saw the docket the day before and I knew it was a double Edinburgh run, which meant 8 hours mileage in my pay packet. Our train was on time, and we stood at the north end of number 9 platform at Newcastle waiting for the train's arrival. It came in manned by a King's Cross men who would lodge at Newcastle, then go back the next day. We had a Deltic. The driver stopped opposite a watering point so my mate could fill the tank for the train heating boiler. In a flash, Bob had the hogger in, while I conversed with the King's Cross driver. There were 13 coaches on, he said, 455 tonnes, maximum speed 80 mile per hour. Then off they went to the lodge. Bob then checked the spanner boiler while, surprise, surprise, the King's Cross guard arrived to greet us. Generally we accepted what the driver had told us, but the guard was doing his job properly. He was a young Indian and asked my name. I told him Friend, and he gave me a broad grin and said, "Mr. Friend, you have 13 coaches on, including 2 vans." Then he gave me the weight and maximum speed. I thanked him and he went back to the rear of the train. After about 3 minutes we got our bell. All the signals showed green, so I pulled the controller open for our 125-mile non-stop run to Edinburgh. We had a big train on, but we had plenty of time, about 2 hours 30 minutes to get there, in order to not to exceed 60 miles per hour at any time for a smooth ride. We were due at Edinburgh Waverley at around 5:30 a.m, then run light to Haymarket Shed. Now to the weather. There was a bitterly cold wind outside and it had started to snow. In the cab there were plenty of drafts. We had a canvas screen pulled down to drown out the sound of the 2 Napier engines, but even so I had to shout to engage my mate in conversation. We forged on through Morpeth at about 65 miles per hour. We then ran over Warkworth auto barrier crossing and we had green signals all the way. While passing over Warkworth crossing, I told Bob that we had just passed over a hot axle box detector. When I worked goods trains at Tyne Yard, if it had registered a hot axle box on one of the goods wagons, then the next signal around the corner would automatically go to double yellow. Thus the train would pull up at Wooden Gate, where the Alnmouth signalman would tell the driver what side the hot box was and the number of axles away from the locomotive. The guard and the driver would get rid of the wagon at Alnmouth station sidings about a quarter of a mile further on. It hadn't happened to me on a passenger train, and nor did I expect it to. To my surprise, however, the next signal did register a double yellow aspect, then a single yellow, and finally a red signal at Wooden Gate. The second man got out of his seat but interjected, "I'll go out there, but come with me, I think we've got a hot one on." I phoned the Alnmouth signalman and he replied straight away, "Yes driver, you have a hot box on the left hand side, driver's side, the 33rd axle. Come back and report to me when you've examined it." It was blowing a gale with wet snow, so I applied my vacuum brake and with Bob set off up the left-hand side of the train, counting the axles, including the Deltic. In the distance we could see another Bardic lamp coming down the train. It was the guard. Bob and I got to the coach first. It was a first-class sleeper, and the Timken roller bearing was white hot, glowing in the dark. The guard looked at it and said, "What will we do with it, Mr. Friend?" I replied, "We're going to drop it off at Alnmouth, guard." The guard replied that every berth on the train was full, no daytime coaches, therefore the first-class passengers would have to get off at Alnmouth and ride in a van which was already full of mail and parcels. Then a coach window opened and the sleeping car attendant looked out. "What are we doing, mate?" I said, "Right, Bonnie lad, wake your passengers up and tell them the good news. They've got to get dressed and get into the last van." He looked at me and said, "Christ, do I have to do that?" "Yes," I said, "you have." I then asked the guard if he knew anything about operating the Buckeye coupling. He didn't, and neither did my second man, but I did. I'd used them as a steam fireman when I was on the A4s, so it was up to me to show the guard. "Right then, guard, walk alongside the coaches to Alnmouth station. Give me a green light. If anything happens to the coach, give me a red one, okay?" "Right," said the guard. Bob and I walked back to the Deltic. "Bob, you can drive a Deltic, can't you?" "I can, Harry," he replied. "This is what we'll do at Alnmouth station. I'll set right up with the defective coach," it was the 7th from the engine, "and stop at the platform end so the passengers can walk to the front of the train and get in the luggage van. I'll then get off, you get back in my seat, and when I give you the green light, set back and I'll release the Buckeye. Then I'll give you a green light for forward. Set forward about a wagon length while the guard operates the vacuum pipe and heating pipe. Then I'll give you a white light for you to set forward over the crossing. When the dolly comes off, set quietly back into the bay platform and stop when I give you a red. When I give you a green light, ease up for me to release the other Buckeye. Then set forward for a wagon length while we again put the Buckeye down and replace the vacuum pipes." Bob understood me all the way, and that's what we did. It took lots of time, however. When I stopped the train with the 7th coach on the platform end, I went with my Bardic lamp, as the station was in complete darkness. Then there was the matter of the passengers, both sexes, and it was hell, it really was. The 2 other attendants had been alerted, the guard and the other attendant of the coach involved, and me. Basically all the passengers had to dress, get their luggage, plus 2 blankets and a pillow, and disembark onto the cold, windswept platform. They then had to stagger back into the cold van and make the best of it. Well, it was Christmas Eve, and I showed each passenger the state of the axle box, and even they, non-railway men, could understand the predicament we were in, so they took it in very good part indeed. We messed about for about 90 minutes, and eventually left Alnmouth and went non-stop to Edinburgh. I put her right up to her 80 mph maximum speed, and we got there at 6:45. Bob mashed the tea and we got our bait aboard the engine. We said goodbye to our guard who lodged at Edinburgh. As to the sleeping car we left at Alnmouth, well, there were no handbrakes at all, so I borrowed a couple of chocks from the guard and chocked the wheels. I got a report about the incident naturally, but I played it down and said the guard operated the Buckeye, and it was accepted.